Hi, everyone. Welcome to Walk Worthy. I'm Erin.
And I'm Lindsay, and today we are going to be talking about a story in Matthew 14. That's where we're going to start from, and it's a story probably a lot of people know.
Yes.
And we are going to talk about what it looks like and what it means to take risks for the kingdom, for the gospel, for the Lord. So we're starting in Matthew chapter 14. I'll summarize for a second. Jesus is with the disciples. They've just fed the 5,000, and he sends the disciples ahead of him in the boat to go across the Sea of Galilee. Just guessing. Okay.
Yes.
And so he does that, and after he does that, he goes and is by himself to pray to the Father. And then the boat, when Jesus finally decides to go to the boat, is way across the water. So he starts going across the water, and we'll pick up there. It says he came to them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter said to him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But seeing the wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?"
So this story, Peter, you got to love Peter because it says before that the boat was a long way off. It's a long way from the land. So it's not like there's shore, it's just deep water. It says that the boat is being battered by the waves because the wind is contrary. So when when Peter sees Jesus and he realizes that it's Jesus, he's like, "Oh, can I just come and walk out there to you?" I don't know if that's my first thought.
Absolutely not.
Like, you're doing that. I want to come do that.
You're right.
Because, the wind's contrary and the boat's being battered. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
That should be what I do.
Yes.
But Peter.
Yeah, it's just who he is. And, you got to, respect that a little bit.
Totally.
Yeah. He wants to be with Jesus.
Yes.
He wants to, take part in what Jesus is doing,
Yeah.
which is cool.
Yeah.
And, was good for Peter. That was a good quality of him
Right.
to be yeah.
Yeah.
But, no, that would not be me.
When the other 11, no one was like, "Oh, me too."
And I'd be like, "Jesus, I'll see you when you get here."
Just finish the distance. But I would love to have that. I would like to think yeah, okay, I'm coming.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yes.
And, what's interesting, I was, just thinking about this story in, terms of what we're talking about today and taking risks. I think a lot of times people, want to do something for the Lord. And they want to, be a part of what he's doing. They see it, other people taking part in it, and they're like, "Oh, I want to do that." And but then maybe when it comes to some of the steps
begin to be contrary.
Yeah, then they're like Peter, and they're like, "Lord, save me."
Yeah. If they even got on the boat to begin
if they
with.
did. Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking about this in that moment, and we've all done things that were risky. It could be even, some people bungee jump or do career moves or whatever.
Yeah.
And you're on the precipice of whatever it is, whatever that decision is of the risk, and you can feel thinking about it, I can feel how I feel. I can feel the anxiety. It takes your breath away a little bit, and you're like, and that's the moment where you decide if you're going to get out of the boat or not.
Yeah.
And a lot of people never ever make it out toward a calling that the Lord's placed in your life, toward a risk of some kind, because it's safer, it feels safer in the boat.
Yeah.
So you never do that. But no one else has that story, just Peter.
Well, and what's interesting, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, we're just flowing with what we're talking about, but I was just thinking, I'm really thinking deeply about this story right now. A lot of times we think it's safer in the boat, but the boat and everything was still being battered. But when he was with Jesus, whatever happened, Jesus got him back to the boat safely. Because the next verse said, when they got back to the boat, when they got into the boat, the wind stopped.
Yeah.
So Peter, maybe even his subconscious might have thought it's safer over there with Jesus than it is in this boat where I'm out of control. Yeah, right. Exactly.
And how to us, the Lord said, "Come." So he invited him out. So you don't want to just take risks to take risks.
Right, just for the sake of it.
Right. But the Lord said, "Come." So he is now in obedience to the Lord, walking where the Lord has asked him to go. And to Peter, this still feels very out of control. The wind is still contrary, and it says that seeing the wind, he becomes frightened and he begins to sink. But the minute that he cries to the Lord, he saves him, which indicates this is all still in the Lord's control and in the Lord's power. And I think that's what we so often forget, because when we start to step out in obedience to the Lord in something that is risky, we start to notice everything around us shaking and rocking, and we freak out as though it's up to us and our control and our ability to stop everything to make it okay, when really he's with Peter. It's fine. But he just stretches out his hand. He's like, you're fine. You know, why are you doubting?
Yeah.
But it's hard, I think, to keep that faith in those moments of risks.
Yeah.
To see the Lord.
Well, and to think about the story, like, literally, I think sometimes we just say, like, oh, yeah, Peter walked on water. But, like, if you literally pictured yourself, like, in, like, turbulent water, like, trying to walk on it, like, yeah, it's still out of control, but you're, like, just putting yourself in an out of control situation. And most of us don't want to do that. Like, oh, when it's calm, like, I'll take a step. Because walking on even calm water, come on. I don't know. Just like having this like epiphany. Like I wouldn't even step on calm water.
It's glass.
Exactly.
Still not coming.
Still not walking on that water. But it was literally turbulent. And so I don't know. But what Peter was doing was still in control of Jesus, even though like everything around him was out of control. But it really takes surrender to like trusting who Jesus is.
Right. So we're probably not going to actually walk on water,
right.
But we can take that risk and apply it to our own lives. And I think about things that become windy to us. You know, what is the thing that stops us from taking the risk? And the first thing I thought of was failure.
Yeah.
You know, that I think for myself, if the Lord calls me to something that I think is too big for me, I will instantly think of the 10 ways that I could fail, which are the way, like, okay, oh, that wave. I'll probably fail in these 8 areas. So should I even try? And the Lord is saying, despite the fact that there is the potential for failure, yes. And obviously we don't need the Lord if there isn't a potential for failure. Like, what do I need God for then? He's saying, still take the risk, still take the step, still go forward.
Yeah, I think along the same lines for me. Like, I just think of like the million ways that I'm underqualified for whatever it is that he's like told me to do, which will result in failure.
Right.
You know, like it's immediately like, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that. So it's almost like you've got the wrong person.
Yes.
Like clearly I'm not the person for this.
And I love the story of Moses for that reason, because the Lord is like, hey, I'm going to send you to Egypt to rescue my people, which is a ridiculous task. He's going up against Pharaoh, who is essentially a god in his own mind. And you're going to say, oh, the God, the real one, said you have to let his people go.
That's crazy.
They're not your people, they're his people.
Yeah.
And Moses obviously has some issues with it. And he's like, well, you know, I always like, he has, you know, what if they won't believe me? What if this? What if that? And the Lord shows, you know, put your hand in, leprosy, throw the staff down, it become a snake. And he's like, I can't remember the exact words, but it's so funny. He's kind of like, I haven't been in the past and I am not recently become better in speaking. He's like, I wasn't, I'm not, and I'm not going to be good at talking. So maybe you should find somebody else, you know?
I don't know if you know this about me.
I'm not sure if you know who I am. And I love that, because for me that resonates so much, because I feel, like you said, so underqualified for where the Lord has called me to walk. And you know, like I never attended women's ministry stuff ever really. So I'm always like, what do women want to do? What events
Googling,
are good? What should I have literally been like, what do women's ministries do? You know, because like, I don't know.
Right.
I'm trying to think, what would I go to?
Yeah.
I don't know, you know, but the Lord called me to lead where I feel underqualified, where I came out of literally changing diapers to like, okay, run the women's ministry. Like, I have no context for this. I don't know what I'm doing. I've been doing this now almost a decade. But you know, you can stop and talk yourself out of taking the risk because you're like, I'm not qualified and I think I'm going to fail. So like Moses says to Aaron, or to the Lord, he's like, can't you send this calling by someone else? But that's when the Lord gets mad. He's patient with his struggle. He's patient with his doubt. He's patient with his fear of failure and him being incompetent. But when Moses is like, why don't you find someone else? Then the Lord, it says the anger of the Lord burned against Moses.
Wow.
I'm always like, all right, I don't really need the Lord mad at me.
Right. Well, and like, it's really cool that God is patient with us in like our, you know, insecurity or like fear, or like, cause he's probably like, yeah, you're not good at that. Yes. Like, he's like, yeah, I know all that. Glad you recognize it too. But when we're just like, no, I'm not going to be obedient and there's gotta be something better. Well, now you're telling the Lord he's wrong.
Yes.
And like, that's a big deal.
And essentially I'm saying your power isn't enough to partner with my incompetence and make it enough. Your grace really isn't sufficient for me.
Right.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's a crazy thing to say. Well, and sometimes I think we maybe have failed at other things in the past. And so we think like, well, I'm not going to do this because how do I know this isn't going to be a failure? And it could be. And that's a hard reality to like kind of like, why would God call me to this if I was going to fail? You know, he's obviously working things in you, maybe at that point, or in somebody else. And we don't always know what it is, but that is a hard reality. But it's just trusting that he knows what's good for my heart and what will make me what I'm supposed to be.
Right. That verse in Philippians that says, forgetting what lies behind and pressing forward to what lies ahead, I think is really good for that, because there are things that we need to let go of in the past, maybe past failures, maybe things that we deemed failure, the Lord had purpose in that we will see later. You know, we've had times, I mean, we had a church plant that I would deem a failure for 2 years. Like it didn't ever really grow. Nothing really happened, but we didn't feel like the Lord was saying that we could quit. So we kept in it, and we are where we are today because we just kept going, showed up another Sunday, even though in my mind, like it wasn't successful. It was a 2-year, very difficult situation, but it was a worldly failure, if you want to call it that. I mean, I don't want to call it a failure necessarily, because it was like there were people. And they were great people. We had, 25 or 30 people. But it was a long season of not seeing blessing where we felt like, literally, like, I don't even know if we should be in ministry at all. I'm not, you're questioning your calling.
Yeah,
this doesn't seem like blessing. And if it's not blessing, are we being disobedient? Should we, Wes was like, maybe I should sell tractors in Iowa. I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I should clean toilets at Target. Like, we're not sure.
Yeah.
But the Lord built things in us that we couldn't even see in the midst of what we would have deemed a failure, for, character and just different things that we needed today. So even past things that might seem like failures, trust that the Lord will bring even something from that. And I would say, if he's called you to something new that you feel afraid that you might fail in, but you know that he's called you, walk in it.
I was thinking too, like, success by God's standard might not look like success what we think it's going to be, the kingdom of God is often like that, where like what you think should be like successful, actually it looks a lot like failure. Things like that, like the poor in spirit, it's a good thing, even though in the world, like being poor is bad. So like a lot of times maybe it was successful, but if you're measuring it by like your own worldly standard, it wasn't.
Right.
And so obviously we're never going to know for sure.
Right.
But just trying to find like those things that God is teaching us in the midst of them.
And not letting our own inadequacy be the thing that keeps us from obedience. There's another verse in, I can never remember if it's 1 or 2 Corinthians, but it says it is God who qualifies you. He makes you adequate to the task. And that was a verse that I found early on that I really leaned on, because I understood I am inadequate. And there's a lot of freedom really in admitting that. Like, okay, I am inadequate for this, but I know that you've called me. And so I'm going to trust that you are going to fill in the gap. Peter was inadequate to walk on the water. You can't do that.
Yeah.
But
he
Lord, he took the steps, and the Lord empowered him to do something supernatural. And the same power that worked then works now, lives in us, and we are able to do things above and beyond our ability when we trust in the Lord to walk alongside of us and give us the grace for it.
I think another thing that's hard is when you think that other people like know you're unqualified, or or not even that, just like what other people think in general, like they criticize it, or they don't agree, or they think you're crazy, or they know like she can't do that.
Yeah.
And maybe they don't say it, but they know. And that's hard. Like it's hard for people to not like you or think you're being dumb, or
yes,
those things are hard.
Or especially if you have a dream in your heart that is, I mean, it says about Mary, when she kind of understood a little bit about Jesus, it says she pondered those things in her heart. It doesn't say she went out and told people, because and she probably didn't understand everything, but she knew there was something very unique about this child. Obviously, supernaturally conceived, the angel, and all the things. And she just pondered those things in her heart. And I think there are times that we have dreams and risks that we're being called to take, that there's a season that we do ponder those things in our heart, and we're careful with who we share them with, because there are a lot of Sanballats who are willing to, and those are the guys that when Nehemiah was trying to build the wall, were coming against and like, can you do that? I don't know if you can do that.
Right.
That wall's so weak. If you jump on it, a fox will jump, or a fox jumps on it, it'll fall down. And the world has so many sand ballots. They're so quick to be, as soon as you take a risk, for people to criticize it. They don't like how you did it, or the method, or maybe you should do it different, or you can't do it. You're not qualified, you know, and the reality is I know all those things, but God's called. And so I'm taking a risk and I'm trusting the Lord. And so I think carefully sharing your dreams, aspirations, callings with people that are going to understand and encourage appropriately, not just yes men, but will stand with you in
Speak
faith.
truth when needed, but push you on towards your goal as well. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. And then I think there's, I don't know, sometimes for me it can be like, I don't want to be like in the devil's crosshairs. I don't want it.
Right. I'm saying.
Like, it would be easier if I didn't do this, because he's going to like not like it. And the spiritual warfare that comes up when you're trying to follow the Lord or carry out something that he asks you to do is hard.
Yes.
And it's sneaky, and he's so smart, and will just, you know, he went 6 degrees away from you and still messed you up.
Yep. Yes.
It's crazy.
And it's always crazy who it comes through.
Right.
You're like, whoa.
Yeah. And like, you just don't see it coming. As much as like you try to be prepared, you're like, oh, you found a new way.
Yeah. And there are times, and I'm sure you have your own stories, where I know, like I mean, you have to also evaluate when you're in a thing, is this sin?
100%.
Or is this spiritual
Yeah,
warfare?
don't just automatically be
Right.
like, the devil's after me. Maybe you after yourself.
You kind of open that door
exactly.
for him. But the reality is that the consequence of sin and spiritual warfare can feel very similar because they have the same author. You know, Satan is the author of sin and deceit and temptation and all that.
Yeah.
And the consequence of that is coming from the same place. So, I mean, the Lord brings consequence too. I don't want to say just Satan, but like correction and warfare sometimes can feel very similar. So you have to discern what you're into. But I mean, there have been times when I know that I'm doing what the Lord's asked me to do, and you just take a hit so accurate. I just have to be like, respect, like, wow, you know. I mean, and you can. Again, like, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm following the Lord. And this is true of the disciples. I mean, they're in prison. They're stoned. They're shipwrecked, bitten by vipers, you know. And it can be, I just think of, in my mind, you know, it talks about us being soldiers of the cross. And I think about being on a battlefield. And you see all these movies sometimes of soldiers in varying capacities that like get hit.
And the stray bullets and stuff. Yeah.
And I'm like, that's what it is spiritually. Like, sometimes you're just literally gushing blood as you're like, I'm taking one more step. I'm going to take one more step. I'm going to keep going because the Lord has called me to do that. But the reality is that it is exhausting and it is discouraging sometimes, because sometimes you're taking shots from inside the house, you know, like inside the family of God, even inside the place where you feel like you should be safe. And you're like, whoa, you know, that's hard. Sometimes they're outside things, but I think for me, the ones that hurt worse are the ones that are closer in. So they're more effective. And it makes you, it's enough sometimes to make you want to take your hands off the risk and be like, okay, you know, like you can start to sink. Like,
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking, even, you know, things can happen in your home. You're in a fight with your husband and you're going like, what are we even fighting about? And then you're like, wait
a second. Doggone Satan.
Yeah. And if you don't catch those moments, or, you know, your kid is acting up or like not sleeping or, you know, whatever it is, like, those can be from the enemy and you can't really do anything about it, but like, well, maybe other people's kids sleep because they aren't trying to do something. I don't know.
Right.
But I think recognizing it and even being thankful, like, God, thank you that you're showing me that, like, I'm doing the right thing, you know? And it's hard, but you have to stay close to him.
Yes.
And stay in the Word, stay encouraged by people that are, you know, running it with you, whoever those, you know, the people that you've shared the dreams in your heart with. And it's hard, but ultimately it will be worth it.
Yes. And in a weird way, you almost have to surrender to the moment. You can try to fight the spiritual warfare. You're not going to stop it. I know, you know, people want to quote scriptures like, no weapon formed against you will prosper. Like, listen, sometimes the weapons Sometimes the darts hit. They just do. And it doesn't mean necessarily that you have a lack of faith, but there have been seasons. I mean, I've had times when I had little kids. I remember coming into usually like the month before a big event, I'll be like, okay, you need to just, what does it say? Like, gird your loins for action, keep sober in spirit, prepare or fix your hope completely on the hope to be brought by Jesus Christ. I'm ready. Like, okay, I'm trying to get myself battle ready. I know that I'm coming into a thing. We right now, this is airing, or we're filming pre-Christmas, but it'll come out post-Christmas. But we're preparing for a massive evangelistic community event in about 10 days. And I know, I'm just looking for where it comes from. And it can be, the attacks can come in varying forms. When my kids were little, I remember, like you said, sleepless nights. And I remember Wes being like, are you doing all right? I'm like, I'm not sleeping. And he's like, oh, are you fine? I'm like, I just know this is where Satan's getting me right now. And I just accept it. I'm not going to be mad about it. I'm going to try to sleep. I'm going to be wise when I can, but you're just living in it. And sometimes you're just living in the warfare. And it doesn't mean that the risk was wrong to take. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have done it. It just means that Satan has, for whatever reason, found fit to afflict you in it. And I always try to refocus and say, this must mean that the Lord's going to do something. If it has caught the attention of the enemy that we're worth afflicting, then God must be going to do something. So rejoicing in that, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just taking it in. Let me get my thoughts together. So the question is, like, what do we do in these situations? And I feel like we're kind of covering that as we go, but there's a lot of things that you just do it. You just do it afraid.
Yeah.
If you know that God has opened the door, you know that he's called you to it. I have had like the opportunity to go on a lot of like missions trips across the world. That's not me. I'm not like, yeah, let's go across the world. And like my husband doesn't go on like any of those trips. I think we've been on like one together. So that's hard. Like I leave him for long periods of time and he's kind of like my safety place, Yeah. So it's like, okay, yeah, I'll get on a plane and go to Zambia.
Pakistan.
Yeah, Pakistan, India, all these things, places I would never probably ever go.
Right.
Except for the fact that God opens the door to go. And I have kind of always felt like, why would I not? Why would I, like, any reason I could give is because of fear, is because of me, is because of my flesh. And so I try to like walk through doors. I remember when we went to Zambia, that was like the hardest one for me. It was the farthest I had ever been from home. And I just remember being in the van on the way to the airport, full on, just like sobbing and looking around like nobody else is crying. But what was really like awesome is after that trip, I felt like, well, if I can do this, like I can go anywhere. And that didn't mean like everything else was super easy.
Right. But
But I think once you see like God carried me through that, he called me to that and then he carried me through it, you think like, oh, I could do that again.
Yeah.
Like sometimes we are so fearful of the risk. We make it worse than it is actually.
Yeah.
Like what if, when all you have to do is just take the next step. God meets you at every single one.
Right.
And then you come out on the other side of it and you're like, oh, well, I could do that again as long as God was like with me. And like I could do it again.
We wait often to not feel anxious or afraid.
Yes.
We want, like you said earlier, that the waves were turbulent and he was walking on them in the midst of the turbulent waves. We want like, okay, Lord, if you can make the sea glass, then I'll get out of the boat.
Yeah.
But that's not the story. It was bumpy. It was rocky. And learning to live in the tension of faith and anxiety. It's like the story in, I think it's Mark 9, where the man brings his boy to the Lord to heal him. And the Lord says, all things are possible if you believe. And he says, I do believe, help my unbelief. Because it's both in there. And I think once you learn to walk with it, you just accept that my flesh is anxious about this. My flesh is afraid, but I'm choosing to trust the Lord, even though that's present. And I'm choosing to walk in faith. I'm choosing to believe that he's going to catch me. I'm choosing to believe that he's going to carry me. And I think that part of it gets more familiar. I don't want to say necessarily easier, but as you walk toward risk, you're like, oh, this is familiar. I know how this is. I'll be a little sick to my stomach 3 days before the event. I won't be able to eat. It's fine. You know, or before, for me, before I speak, like there's a certain cutoff time where I'm like, and now I can't eat. I just, just feel a little pukey.
Yeah.
But you just, I think at first I thought, well, something must be wrong. Like I need to get to the place where I'm just like at perfect peace and like, oh, praise, like I want to go out on the stage and talk to people. And for me, it's not like that. It's just not. And so that I just learned I have to do this feeling a little pukey and trust that the Lord, when I open my mouth to speak, that he's going to meet me there. And he does. He has never yet left me high and dry, because that's not the God that we serve. So if you're walking where he's called you to walk, he's out there with you. And if you begin to sink, he's going to save you.
Well, and, I know we're talking about it in our context, especially right now heading towards the big event, but there are a lot of like smaller areas in my life too, where like, I need to call this person. I need to talk to him about this. Yes. Like, or you have a friend that maybe you've been seeing some things in their life that you're like, man, I need to talk to him about that. And the same thing, like, I'm going to like, you want to wait until you feel peaceful about it, or like maybe she'll bring it up, or, like, and you want to wait till that. But sometimes you just know, like, no, I know God's telling me to do this, and I just need to like hit the green button on the phone and call him. And there are so many times when I like make a phone call and my stomach is like, I mean, I just don't like talking on the phone. I'm a millennial and we don't like talking on phones. But there's also too, just like sometimes I got to talk to somebody about something and I don't want to do it.
Right.
And that seems small, but still like my stomach hurts when I hit their phone number and I just sit there like, or I'll pray right before, like, God, please just give me the right words to say, and he's faithful and he does. And he shows up in those ways too that are smaller, but feel big.
Yes.
And so like being obedient in those ways too. It's risky.
Well, and people sometimes I'll have a wife come and talk to me about her marriage that is a mess. Yeah. And I'll say, the Lord has called you to respect your husband, to submit to your husband. Do you feel like you're respectful? Are you kind? Are you building him up where you can? And often the response is, in so many words, I don't want to take that risk until he begins to change. And the fact of the matter is, it is a risk to put yourself out there, to decide that you're going to be obedient if he never is. Yeah. But trusting, even like you said, in small ways, it doesn't have to be a giant calling necessarily. Even that's a huge risk to your heart. But you're putting yourself in the place where the Lord can work a miracle. Yeah. If you stay where you are, then you just stay where you are. Yeah. Nothing ever changes. But believing that the Lord will provide for where he's called, because even those small ways to our hearts can seem risky, but, and you can see the waves, like, what if he never changes? What if he hurts me? What if, you can pick out all the waves and we can look at all those things, or we can say there's one path forward in obedience. Yeah. There's one path that the Lord is going to help me walk. And is it 1 in a million? Yes. But if he's on it, then that's the one he's going to keep you on.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. That's hard. And Peter started noticing the waves. Sounds like Peter was looking at Jesus, and that's all he cared about, right? Yeah. Like he was looking at Jesus, like, hey, I want to come out there to you. And then he kind of noticed the waves after that. And, maybe we kind of like are like, yeah, I want to follow Jesus, whatever it is. And you start walking towards something, and then you're like, wait. And then you're like, I want to get back in the boat. Yes. Maybe you're like already in the middle of it. Maybe it's not stepping out of the boat. Maybe you're like, get me back on the boat.
That's usually me. Yeah. Like, wait a second. What happened?
This is not what I signed up for. But continuing to keep your eyes on Jesus. Yes. Once you do see the waves, even if you're already in the middle of it, like you've come this far, like just keep going. Take the next step.
Yep.
And let the other things kind of fade away. Like, I wonder like what the other disciples were doing when Peter was like, Peter, what are you doing? Are you crazy? Like maybe they were, and he could have been like, yeah, you're right, I'm nuts. Yeah. Or, but his eyes were on Jesus, and that's where he wanted to be.
Well, and I'm at the beginning, I can identify with Peter, like, I'm ready. Like, let's get out of the boat. Let's go. And then all of a sudden it gets stormy and you're like, whoa, wait a second. Yeah. And there are times in the middle of that storm where I will reevaluate my whole life. Like, first of all, did I take a misstep? Did I call myself out of the boat and the Lord didn't call me? Right. Did I do something wrong in the middle of this? Is there sin? Is that why it's stormy? And for me, it really, really helps. And this is why it's important to know if the Lord called you to do something or not. It helps me to come back to, because I'll be in the middle of the storm, like, why did I get out of that boat? Why am I out here right now? So to come back to the initial calling where, no, the Lord said come. The Lord opened these doors. The Lord made this path straight, and that's why I'm on it. And while I was on it, a storm arose. And that happens frequently when you're in the middle of something and the Lord calls you out to something. A lot of times the first few steps are very peaceful because I think he wants you to start. And then a storm arises. And then we start to be like, whoa, what's happening? But then I think it's so important, at least for me, it helps my faith to be like, okay, God called me here. And if God called me here, then he's not going to fail me. And so I just need to hunker down. I need to place my feet on the rock that is Jesus. I need to weather the storm. And one way or another, I'm going to come through the end of it to whatever it is that he's called me to, not because of me, but because of him.
Well, and the more we do that, the more we obey in the midst of risk, he grows our faith. Those are the things that grow our faith. Because if we're never like using our faith, then like it's never going to grow.
Right.
But those are the things that, like I was saying, when I went to Zambia, like not only did that increase my faith, it like kind of enlarged my capacity for things that I could like do for the Lord, because I'm like, oh, I saw what God did here. And I know that he'll do that again if he's calling me to something, and he's going to carry me through it.
And I think you get a little bit over time less rattled. You know, like initially when you first start walking with the Lord, you first start taking a risk and it starts to get stormy. And the first time is always you look around like, what is happening? And then after a while you become a little more battle worn, I think, where you're like, okay, I know what this is. It's still exhausting. It's still so hard, but I know what it is, and I'm choosing to trust the Lord. Yeah, it's less shocking. You're like, oh, all right. Then sometimes you're just Elijah, like, it's enough, Lord. Just take me home.
I'm the only one left.
Yeah, no one else is with me. No one else is doing this. Why do I have to do this? So then it's a different battle that you're fighting.
Yeah. Well, and it is like joyful in the midst of something, like, to have been called.
Yes.
If you can remember that, like, I'm thankful God called me, and let that push you on to keep going. Like, yes, it's hard, but God saw me fit to use in this situation, and that is awesome.
Amazing.
So keep going.
Yes. There's a verse in 1 Corinthians 2 that says, things which eye has not seen and ear has not heard and which have not entered in the heart of man, all that God has prepared for those who love him. And I love that verse because I think I want to walk in all that the Lord has prepared for me. I don't want to miss something. I don't want to look back. And this is a motivator for me in times of risk. I don't want to look back because that first step out is always like, ugh. And sometimes I'll think in 5 years, was this a crossroads that I will regret not having taken? And not that can be your only factor, obviously a lot of prayer, but it is something that I think about, that I don't want to look back at something and say I was too afraid. And so I didn't step out of the boat, and what would have happened if I had? Because the Lord has prepared things that we haven't conceived of, that we can't even begin to understand, above and beyond our capacity. I mean, he's literally gives us the capacity to supernaturally do things, miraculously do things, to carry things that in and of myself I can't carry, if we trust in him. And I want to do that. I want to walk in all of that. I want to see all of that.
Yeah, I don't want to miss it. That sometimes is like my only motivator, not like my love for the Lord, and like, well, I don't want to miss that. Because my only reason is that I was too scared.
Right.
Like, how embarrassing.
Right.
How embarrassing.
How much faith do you have?
Yes, exactly. And like, I don't know, what does that say about who I think God is?
Right.
And that's really at the core of all this is, do you believe that he called you? And do you believe that he will be faithful if he called you? And if you are not willing to take the risk, like, maybe you don't. Maybe you need to go back to like step one of like, who do I really think God is? Because it is uncomfortable. Like when he calls you to something, it's uncomfortable. Most times, read the Bible.
99.9% of the time.
He was calling people that didn't know what the heck they were doing and shouldn't have been doing what they were doing. That's how it's going to be if you follow him. So like,
that's how he's glorified.
Exactly. Like if he got the most, like for myself, like if he had like Beethoven up there doing music and like, well, actually was Beethoven the one that, anyway. It just,
he wrote stuff. Definitely a composer. That's a good illustration.
I'm just trying to think of a good musician that knows what the heck they're doing. See, I don't even know who the musicians are. But if he had somebody like that, not that he couldn't still be glorified, but I truly have almost no idea what I'm doing. And I will gladly tell people that because,
Yes.
like, look at God. Like, look what he
Yes.
does. Let me boast in this weakness because truly
Yes.
this is a miracle.
Yes.
And let him get glory through that. So it's like exciting to
Yeah.
be called to something that you're not good at, but also very scary.
Yes. I am doing the thing that I said I never wanted to do ever. And I praise God. I'm so grateful that he uses me. Every time someone's like, hey, that's so great. You're such a gifted speaker. I'm like laughing between me and the Lord because I'm like, I never wanted to do this ever,
Right.
you know? And I'm like, credit to you, Lord, because I know in and of myself, I'm just a mess. But this is the space where you get to see the burning bush. Like Moses turned aside to see that, and he got to see that. He got to see the plagues fall in Egypt. He got to lead them across and part the Red Sea. And we all think, oh man, it would be so cool to watch that Red Sea part. Well, minutes before that, he had the Egyptian army pursuing him, and he's just holding up his hands, hoping that water stays where it is so all the people can cross. Like that was probably pretty stressful.
Yes.
On the other side of that, it's amazing. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, praise the Lord. And that is a spiritual high that's incredible, where you're such a mountaintop experience where you're like, you get to see the works of the Lord. But before that happens,
Yes.
there's a lot of anguish that happens before
Yeah.
that. And for me, if I've taught Tuesday nights enough times where it's not so like, ugh. When I do other things, you know, sometimes churches will call me and ask me to speak, or retreats, or, you know, Christmas teas we've done. I remember the first one that I spoke at, it was, I mean, absolute anguish. I was like, is there a flight leaving for Mexico?
You were sweating
like, I'm
blood.
serious. I'm like, could I get myself the flu and just make Wes do it? Like, I cannot do this. It was so hard for like the week. And it was as though I had scheduled myself to have my arm amputated without anesthetic. You know, like that's my
Right.
mental state for like a week. Like, why did I do this to myself? Why did I say yes? Why am I doing this? And you're just in that anguish. And then I did the tea, you know, and it was over. And the relief of that and watching the Lord work is like, there's just nothing like that to be able to, you know, for Peter, like to step out of the boat and walk on the water. He got to do that. Nobody else did that. Nobody else took that risk. Nobody else saw the Lord save them like that from the midst of the turbulent water.
Yeah.
But you have to obey in the angst.
Yeah, you have to realize that you're pressing on towards a reward. And maybe it's not even something that we see here,
Right.
which, I mean, sometimes you do get to see it here, and that's awesome. And sometimes you don't, but we still know that it's worth the wait. Jesus is worth the wait. The reward that we'll see of how he used it in the future, the crown of life in the future, like pressing on in obedience, it's always going to be worth it.
And he is worth my obedience, even when it costs me.
Yeah.
He's worth that. And the gospel's worth that. I mean, we should be working all the time, wherever we are, toward helping people understand who Jesus is. And part of that is through our obedience as Christians, and part of that is through our testimony of the gospel. And those things should be worth it. And that should be worth any price that we're going to pay, any cost to ourselves, because we deem it so valuable for people to enter the kingdom of heaven that I will literally lay down my life, whether that means like you're taking piece by piece, one cut at a time, or you're taking the whole thing. If that means the advancement of the gospel, I'm here for it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the ultimate risk.
The ultimate
The
risk.
ultimate risk.
But can we daily live for it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a heavy and high calling to be willing. I love the verse that says, if I live for the Lord, and if I die for the Lord. And that's risky every day.
Yep.
And entrusting ourselves to him,
Yeah.
that he will carry us, that he has called us, and that he is faithful.
Amen.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this was encouraging to you. Maybe there's something God's been calling you to and you've been afraid to get out of the boat. We are praying that you will take that step, that you will walk in obedience, and that you will see the reward that comes with it. We will see you next time. But until then, walk worthy.